Before starting, I'd just like to say, while I am using footage from the Watchmen movie and show, I'm mostly talking about the comic. The movie's different ending would just make this video a bit more confusing than it needs to be, and while I make a quick reference to the show, it too changes a few notions that would make this video needlessly long. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. I put a lot of work into this. Anyways, spoilers for a 35-year-old comic series. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen is the only graphic novel to ever win a Hugo Award. Now, while I would argue there are fantastic stories in the medium that have definitely been overlooked, I get why Watchmen got it. Despite serving as a deconstruction of the superhero genre, I would say the story is best understood as a work of political and philosophical fiction. The story presents itself as a murder mystery set during the peak of the Cold War, in a world where masked heroes and one superhero exist: the omnipotent Dr. Manhattan. Through the existence of these heroes, the war went down very differently. Most notably, the Americans conquered the Viet Cong in the Vietnamese War, turning Vietnam into the 51st American state. The existence of an American superhero pushes the tensions between the USSR and the Americans to be greater than those we knew in the real world. Nuclear warfare is imminent. The end is nigh. Enter Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias, the smartest man in the world. Previously working as a masked vigilante, Veidt is now a celebrity billionaire with a plan to save the world, united against a common enemy. He therefore stages an alien attack on Manhattan, killing 3 million people, putting an end to the Cold War as the world's superpowers stop pointing their weapons at each other and start looking for their unknown enemy. He is the man who murdered the retired vigilante known as the Comedian at the start of the story, as he believes his former colleague would try to expose him. Additionally, he was able to use the same nuclear energy that created Dr. Manhattan to prevent the superhero from knowing his plan. By the end, Dr. Manhattan, aware that this attack was not in fact alien in nature, chooses to keep quiet. He recognizes that Veidt has united the world's nations, and telling the truth would only plunge the world back into chaos. He even kills Rorschach, the superhero with my parents fighting as a mask, because he threatened to tell the truth.
I'm leaving this galaxy for one a little less complicated.
In Plato's Republic, the Greek philosopher documents many of his mentor's lectures, one of these being Socrates' ideal city. A key element of this city being that it is ruled by philosopher-kings, individuals who, at a young age, would be taken and raised separately so they may be best fit to lead the political realm of the city, making the important decisions for the rest of the population. The first step in creating philosopher-kings consists of finding the children that have interests in the subjects that are required to lead and that are talented in said subjects. These children will then be trained in mathematics before exclusively doing physical exercise for 2 to 3 years. When this segment of their training ends, they're 20. And those who did not perform as well as their peers have been filtered out. This is so toxic, holy shit. Those remaining will be tested on their ability to incorporate what they were taught into a coherent whole. And, by the time they're 30, they will be tested on their ability to give up their subjective biases in order to obtain truth of thought. The students that pass these tests will then study philosophical dialect for 5 years before being sent into different political positions, notably as high-ranking leaders in warfare. This serves to observe which of these students continuously applies their studies in practice. Finally, 15 years later, they become philosopher-kings at age 50. They will rule the city amongst themselves for the rest of their lives, making the political decisions so that the people don't have to, and they will train the next generation of philosopher-kings. The idea here is the philosopher-kings will have a better understanding of what's best for the people than the people themselves. Additionally, this relieves the average citizen of remaining informed and participant in political matters, a task that would be demanded in true democracies. They would therefore govern the people for them. This resembles how elected officials govern the people in democratic countries. However, the philosopher-kings are not elected. They are chosen by those already ruling. Now, there is an argument to be made about if those governing our policies are truly elected, though I'll come back to that one later.
I've made myself feel every day. See every innocent face I've murdered to save humanity. You understand, don't you? Without condoning or condemning. I understand.
In many ways, Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan can be viewed as takes on philosopher-kings, even though their paths differ from what Socrates envisioned. For Adrian Veidt, exceptional intelligence was clearly displayed at a young age. However, the boy opted to underperform as he aimed to maintain a mundane reputation in the eyes of his educators and parents. He did not want them to view him as exceptional. Not yet. By the time he was 17, his parents died, and he rid himself of their fortune by giving it all away. This is when his path started resembling that of a philosopher-king. The young man took on a pilgrimage to reach his peak intellectual, physical, and spiritual capabilities. More specifically, he followed the path of Alexander the Great, as this was his idol. After returning from his pilgrimage, Veidt took up the Greek name of Ramses II and began his career as a crime fighter by taking down an opium smuggling ring. Crime syndicates continued to be his focus moving forward. His intelligence and physical prowess were on full display in combat, which eventually earned him the title of the smartest man in the world. In 1960, the world's smartest man would meet the nuclear man for the first time. Our two philosopher-kings crossed paths here before they would later join forces as members of Crime Busters, which would be led by Veidt. The team would be short-lived, as the comedian would eventually point out the futility of a vigilante team when the atomic threat is hanging over everyone's heads. Ozymandias therefore set his sights on solving the nuclear crisis. He would retire from crime fighting in 1975, and he would use his public persona to create an even greater wealth for himself. This wealth would be used to fund the false alien attack that would descend on New York a decade later. The attack that would unify the world. The vigilante chapter of Veidt's life is easily comparable to the time philosopher-kings must spend as military leaders. It immediately followed his time training mentally and physically, and it would eventually lead him to his position of greater power. Though Veidt did not publicly govern the fate of the people, he did orchestrate it. His justification being that he knew what was best for them, and he would save them by doing this difficult task. He even went as far as to launch an attack on his own people, showing that he is unbiased in the political sphere, another trait searched for in philosopher-kings. We see that Veidt was not in it for the fame and glory. He was simply aiming to guide the world out of nuclear apocalypse. In the Watchmen TV show, which functions as a sequel to the comic, we even discover that he had planned out the next decades of political rule, leaving strict instructions for those who will follow him, in order to guarantee maintained peace through the world. On the subject of the TV series, what is said of Ozymandias here is largely true about Lady True in the show.
It's almost over.
Master, may I ask you something?
Of course.
The mask. Why did you make me wear a mask?
Because masks make men cruel.
That's what you wanted. For me to be cruel.
I had 8 years to kill. Having a worthy adversary helped keep me sane.
Was I, Master? Was I a worthy adversary?
No. But you put on a hell of a show.
On the flip side, Dr. Manhattan, born Jonathan Osterman, came from rather humble beginnings. The nuclear man was originally the son of a watchmaker and planned to continue in his father's footsteps. However, when Osterman was 16 years old, news broke that the United States had dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Recognizing that the world had forever changed, John's father urged him to change career paths. Watchmakers would no longer be needed. Nuclear scientists would. The young man followed his father's advice, and his mix of intelligence and hard work got him a spot at Princeton University, where he would attend lectures by Albert Einstein. He would attend the university from 1948 to 58 and graduate with a PhD in nuclear physics. Upon graduating, Osterman receives a job at a test facility owned by the US government. It is at this facility that Osterman would work on the intrinsic field experiment chamber, in which he would eventually leave his girlfriend's watch by accident. In an attempt to retrieve the watch, Osterman enters the chamber. However, it is activated and locked. The door cannot be opened, and the experiment cannot be stopped. His colleagues watch in horror as they are powerless to save him. He is vaporized. To the world, Osterman is dead, and though they don't know it yet, Dr. Manhattan is born. Following this event, strange events would take place at the research facility. A nervous system with brains and eyes, but no body, would appear before vanishing just as quickly. Soon later, a circulatory system would do the same, followed by a partially muscled skeleton a few days later. It seemed as though whatever was haunting the lab was slowly trying to build itself a body. Finally, on November 22nd, 1959, John Osterman appears in his new form, hairless, blue, glowing, and in the nude. In his rebirth, the watchmaker's son found new abilities. Simply put, he's able to observe, control, and manipulate matter on an atomic level, making his power levels near limitless. This attracted government interest, as they aimed to make him a costume crime fighter under the name Dr. Manhattan. Though he originally accepted the name and costume, he did not agree with the atomic symbol they tried imposing onto him. Instead, he opted to imprint the hydrogen element symbol onto his forehead. Manhattan would operate as both a crime fighter and as a valuable asset to the US military, playing important roles in the Vietnam War as well as in attempts to end local crime. When the Keene Act outlawed masked vigilantes in 1977, Osterman was not affected, as he continued operating with the military, being an essential element of national defense. Meanwhile, as Manhattan further develops his powers, he slowly loses his humanity, especially as he stops perceiving time to be linear. Though he does display emotions, particularly of anger, several times throughout the story, he no longer observes his surroundings the way most humans would, and therefore does not understand the world the way we would. To him, it is a collection of atoms, and Though these can produce miracles, the concerns of political or moral matters escape him. He seeks the objective truth. These man-made and manufactured concerns are viewed as pointless. This is where
a live human body and a deceased human body have the same number of particles. Structurally, there's no difference.
meme comes from. Once again, John Osterman displays many criteria of Philosopher-Kings. He has the intellectual and physical capabilities, he searches for objective truths, and he doesn't particularly believe in political biases, despite having helped the US government on several occasions.
God exists, and he's American. Now, if you begin to feel an intense and crushing feeling of religious terror at the concept, don't be alarmed. That indicates only that you are still sane.
I am tired of Earth. I'm tired of being caught in the tangle of their lives. They claim their labors are to build a heaven. It's too late.
But this story also illustrates the issues caused by Philosopher-Kings. Though these two characters come from different origins, their paths are very similar, and lead the two to think in very similar ways. They eventually made their way to intellectual excellence, either through academia or self-discovery, before gaining phenomenal physical abilities and serving as crime fighters. Along the way, they lost their interests for the smaller conflicts and searched to resolve the larger issues the world faced. In fact, they both find the other to be fascinating, in a world of people who bore them. Therefore, it shouldn't be surprising to the reader to see Manhattan take Ozymandias' side as the conflict comes to an end. They are from the same environment, largely isolated from individuals who do not think like them and have the same interests. Of course, they would make similar decisions. A decision that would likely not be supported by most others if they had a say in the matter. This is one of the major flaws with the concept of Philosopher-Kings. Though they may act in what they believe to be the people's best interests, they do not represent the people's beliefs, nor do they truly know them. They have been trained to be more for so long that the reality the people live in is likely unknown to them, and as they all come from the same reality, there is very little room for new or even opposing ideas. The way we view the world is largely based on our experiences as individuals, and if the individuals making the decisions all have very similar, nearly identical experiences, then they risk to have the same views. The Philosopher-Kings therefore form an echo chamber between themselves, where the same ideas are encouraged and repeated time and time again. Additionally, by having their terms last their lifetime, this issue is only amplified, as if there are a limited number of seats as Philosopher-Kings, there will rarely be any new blood entering the discourse, and even if there can be a limitless number of Philosopher-Kings, there would almost certainly be a hierarchy created based off seniority. It would even be possible for the newer Philosopher-Kings to work alongside those who taught and trained them. There would be a power dynamic at play here, even if these individuals are trained not to use their powers in this way. Besides, who are you to try to oppose your mentors? Even if they are not openly using their seniority to dismiss or silence the younger, it is often very hard to oppose those who taught us what we know. Going even further into this, the idea that philosopher-kings should rule with no political biases is simply unrealistic and unpractical. In a human world, it is nearly impossible to separate the political element from the equation, as no nation exists as a secluded unit, and we do not live in a united world. Though Ozymandias' attempt to unite the world seems successful at that moment, Dr. Manhattan indicates that all he truly did was delay the inevitable, as he tells Veidt,
I agree. John, wait. I did the right thing, didn't I? It all worked out in the end. In the end? Nothing ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends. John, wait. What do you mean by...
Clearly, we are meant to understand that, though Ozymandias has saved the world for now, it will almost certainly return to the state it was in. This also illustrates the unrealistic and impractical expectation that philosopher-kings should be apolitical. As I said, in a human world, there is no organized society that exists as a secluded unit. Similarly, we as individuals do not exist in a world where we are unaffected by those around us. For the ruling class to act as though this were not the case, to act as though their decisions do not contribute to international and local conflicts, would be ignorant. The very concept of a ruling group is political in nature, especially when this group is specifically raised to be different from those they rule over. Overall, the comic illustrates how having a disconnected ruling class that is raised with the intention to rule, and that appoints itself, will not best represent the desires of the people, and will likely fail at seeing its own flaws. After all, I believe most would not agree with the sacrifice of 3 million to simply delay what is already happening. I would be foolish to say republics, as we have in most democratic countries, are ideal, and it is obvious that true democracies are simply impossible to achieve. However, I would argue it is better to have a governing class that must somewhat appease to the people, than have a disconnected government that believes it knows best for a class it was never really part of. But criticizing the concept of philosopher-kings is by no means new. In fact, Plato's student, Aristotle, often criticizes the concept, stating that they should not rule. So, why is the Supreme Court of the United States, which I will be referring to as SCOTUS from here on out, still using a rather similar model? Now, to say SCOTUS and philosopher-kings are synonymous wouldn't be true, but I wouldn't say they're not philosopher-kings. Though SCOTUS's only requirement is that the justices be trained in the law, this is far from the only thing that's being looked at when they are selected, especially as they're nominated by the president in power before being voted in by the Senate. So, chosen by the ruling class, just like philosopher-kings. Additionally, they serve for life, like philosopher-kings.
Why is heaven not enough?
This is not my home. My home is 390 million miles away. And my children, all 8 billion of them, are undoubtedly standing in their cribs, crying out in desperation for me to return. Heaven is not enough because heaven doesn't need me.
Enjoy your fucking cake.
Now, how does one get nominated to be the next justice? There's no clear cookie-cutter way that guarantees you a spot. However,
By observing the path taken by the current justices, we get a general idea of how to get there. Out of the 9 active members and 4 living but retired members, 11 attended an Ivy League university at some point during their education. More precisely, all 11 either attended Harvard or Yale. The other 2 attended Stanford and Notre Dame, Stanford being currently ranked the number 3 law school in the US, despite not being an Ivy League school, and Notre Dame being the number 25 law school in the US. So, it seems Ivy League education isn't a requirement, but it doesn't hurt. Of course, to go to any of these schools, you have to pay tuition, and it's a lot. So wealth is almost certainly a requirement as well. We then observe that most Supreme Court justices have served as clerks to judges, particularly in the District of Columbia's Court of Appeals, as it's classified as its own circuit. The Court of Appeals serves to review decisions made in tribunal or trial court when parties request to change a decision made. Similarly, the Supreme Court often serves to review decisions of the Court of Appeals, functioning as a last resort of sorts. It therefore makes sense that the Supreme Court justice would first serve in the Court of Appeals, as they would be familiar with the process. Additionally, it makes sense that these justices come from the District of Columbia circuit in particular, as this is where they're most likely to make a name for themselves in the eyes of the White House. This, in many ways, mirrors the point in a philosopher-king's career during which they are positioned in smaller, yet necessary, positions of public service. Finally, when comes the time of nomination, presidents opt to nominate future justices that they believe share their political and social values. Now, while this does reflect the people's decision in the previous election, presidential terms only last 4 years, while a position as Supreme Court Justice lasts a lifetime. So, while a justice might have represented the people's values 18 years ago, it's also very possible they do not today. Just looking at this profile, we understand that it is, generally, a very specific type of person that becomes a Supreme Court Justice. Of course, it's definitely a good thing that they are familiar with the law, and that they have the best education possible in that regards. But considering the financial requirements these institutes often require, it is hard to believe that these justices necessarily know the realities of the general American people. And considering they are nominated by the ruling class, it often feels like they don't really serve to represent the working class. Of course, it's not all Supreme Court justices that are more lenient towards the powers that put them in place. Some defy this expectation, such as Justice Warren, who was extremely liberal despite being nominated by Republican President Eisenhower. In more recent memory, Justice Kennedy was not particularly loyal to either side of the political spectrum, often serving as the tiebreaker vote. As a result, he has, on several occasions, been referred to as the Philosopher-King, as they are theoretically meant to be politically neutral. Clearly, I'm not the only one who sees the similarities. That said, all this leads to situations where justices who can overturn decisions that directly affect the law, who are unfamiliar with the reality of most people, and who primarily serve the ruling class, do not make decisions that necessarily reflect the interests of the people.
What the hell happened to us? What happened to the American dream?
What happened to the American dream? It came true. You're looking at it.
The decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, for instance, is clearly one that is not in touch with the American people, which we've observed since the decision was made. Indeed, the decision that is widely unpopular with the political left has proven to be unpopular in many traditionally Republican states, illustrating to which extent the Supreme Court of the United States fails to serve the American people. The characters of Ozymandias and Dr. Manhattan illustrate many of the issues with the philosopher-kings as presented by Socrates. We understand that, although these figures may indeed be great thinkers, their decisions may not represent the desires of the people, as they're so disconnected with the people they're trying to help. Additionally, we find that the current system in place with SCOTUS is rather similar to the flawed system of the philosopher-kings. While I recognize that modern democracies are far from perfect, I do believe it is better the power be in the hands of the people than it remains in the hands of the ruling class that echoes the same disassociated ideas. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is the weakest form of government, except for all the others that have been tried. Much for watching this video, and thank you to the new audience I got while working on this video. I am so grateful for everyone watching. It really means a lot to me. I have been leaning into basic philosophy and political philosophy in a few of my more recent videos, so if you like this, make sure to check those out too. Please let me know what you think, like and subscribe if you like my content, and thank you so much. The support is greatly appreciated, especially as I've been putting a lot of work into these lately. Let me know if there's any show or movie you recommend. Who knows? I might make a video about it.